The contemporary media landscape is heavily populated by an evocative, recurring icon, the Gaelic warrior woman. In historical fiction, novels, television dramas, and digital essays, she is standardly depicted standing atop a windswept crag, claymore in hand, leading a charging column of painted Highlanders into battle. Within these highly romanticized narratives, portrayed, Scotland is subtly recast as a progressive oasis society where a rugged landscape and tight-knit clan solidarity somehow dissolved the rigid gender boundaries that kept the rest of medieval and early modern Europe in a patriarchal grip. This image is visually powerful, emotionally resonant, and completely fabricated. The modern appetite for ideological validation has found a uniquely fertile playground in the gaps of popular Scottish history. By treating folklore as documentary fact and romantic Victorian poetry as archival record, a revisionist movement has sought to retroactively draft Scottish women into frontline military service. But history is an unyielding discipline. When we push past the cinematic smoke and mirrors, we find that the traditional Scottish clan system was not an egalitarian frontier. It was one of the most strictly militarized, uncompromisingly patriarchal, and intensely patrilineal social structures in the Western world. To project 21st century gender fluidity or modern feminist power structures onto the 16th century Scottish Highlands is not a reclamation of lost history. It is an act of ideological imposition that erases the genuine, distinct reality of the women who actually lived there. To understand how the myth of the female warlord gained such widespread cultural traction, one must trace the historical phenomenon known to scholars as Highlandism. For centuries, the lowlands of Scotland and the English political establishment viewed the Gaelic-speaking Highlander with a mix of dread and contempt, classifying them as lawless savages. However, following the total destruction of the clan system in the wake of the Jacobite defeat at Culloden in 1746, a profound psychological shift occurred within British culture. The Highlands were suddenly safe, permanently pacified, and ripe for romanticization. The invention of the Romantic Highlands was essentially a luxury of the conqueror. Once the clans were completely disarmed, their native dress restricted, their language suppressed, and their social structures dismantled, the British cultural elite spearheaded by literary figures like Sir Walter Scott reimagined the region. It transformed from a zone of brutal agrarian survival and endemic blood feuds into a theatrical stage for chivalry, emotional intensity, and ancient, untamed liberty. Within this romantic framework, historical accuracy was secondary to emotional impact. Fictionalized accounts of ferocious Highland women defending their glens were generated. To satisfy a public obsessed with the exotic other, 19th century novels and popular ballads took marginal historical figures or allegorical folklore and transformed them into literal historical truths. The fierce, vengeful matriarch became a standard trope of romantic literature. Over generations, these literary inventions bled into popular consciousness, laying the groundwork for modern revisionists to claim that behind every historical clan chief stood a hidden matriarchy. The reality, preserved in court records, land charters, and tax tallies, tells an entirely different story. The word clan derives from the Gaelic for children or offspring, implying a simple, harmonious extended family unit. In practice, however, an early modern Scottish clan was a highly sophisticated, territorial military corporation. It operated in a volatile environment where the authority of the Scottish crown was a distant rumour, and local security depended on a clan's capacity to project physical violence. A clan was not a peaceful commune. It was an armed cartel organized for the defense and acquisition of land, cattle, and resources. The internal hierarchy was calibrated toward rapid mobilization for war. The elite tier, the chief, chieftains, and tacksmen formed a distinct military caste. Because political survival in the Highlands required the constant threat of retaliatory violence, every structural element of the clan prioritized physical force. In such an ecosystem, power was inextricably linked to combat capacity, effectively barring women from positions of supreme structural authority. The social pyramid of the Highlands was built from the top down to execute military operations. The tacksmen, who held large leases of land directly from the chief, acted as the officer corps, responsible for drilling the tenantry and ensuring every able-bodied male possessed a functional weapon. Women occupied no space within this chain of command. Their exclusion was not an accidental oversight or a simple prejudice. It was a foundational requirement of a society where a failure in military leadership meant the slaughter, displacement, or starvation of the entire population. In the Anglo-Norman feudal system that dominated England and lowland Scotland, land and titles generally followed strict primogeniture passing from father to the eldest son, and occasionally to daughters if no sons existed. In the Gaelic Highlands, however, succession was governed by the ancient system of tanistry, Ander Tanis. The successor to the chiefship, the tanist, was elected during the reigning chief's lifetime from a pool of eligible males within the Derbfine, a kinship group spanning for generations of the ruling family line. The criteria for election were pragmatic and unyielding. The successor had to be an adult male of sound mind, proven bravery, and military competence. The tanistry system explicitly functioned as a structural mechanism to prevent women, minors, or incompetent individuals from inheriting supreme power. If a chief died leaving an infant son or a daughter, the clan did not wait. The Derbfine immediately selected an uncle, a brother, or a cousin who could strap on a backsword and lead the clan's warriors into the field the very next day. Tanistry was a legal shield designed precisely to keep the chiefship exclusively in adult male hands, neutralizing the threat of a female or underage succession. Revisionist historians often scour the archives of lowland courts to find instances where a woman is listed as the legal heir to a Highland estate. They present these legal entries as definitive proof that women could rule clans. This argument, however, conflates the bureaucratic paperwork of Edinburgh with the political and military realities of the Great Glen. There was a constant friction between the statutory Scots law written in the south and the customary law practiced in the north. The Crown frequently tried to impose feudal inheritance laws, granting charters to daughters as heirs general when a chief died without a son. But within the Highlands, these charters were often treated as worthless parchment unless backed by an army. Time and again, male relatives simply ignored the courts, seized the lands by force, and rallied the clansmen behind a male leader. The clan followed the man who could lead them, not the girl who held the paper. To see this conflict between Edinburgh law and Highland reality in stark clarity, one needs only to examine the historical records of Clan MacLeod in the mid-16th century. The crisis that erupted upon the death of William MacLeod, 9th Chief of Dunvegan, provides definitive proof of the clan system's structural intolerance for female rule. In 1557, William MacLeod died, leaving no male heirs. His only child was an infant daughter, Mary MacLeod. Under feudal Scots law, Mary was the undisputed heir general to the vast MacLeod estates, including Dunvegan Castle on the Isle of Skye. The powerful Earl of Argyll and the Scottish crown itself stepped in to guarantee her inheritance, using the full weight of southern legal machinery. What did the clansmen of MacLeod do? They completely rejected her. The contemporary estate files and records preserved in the Collectanea de Rebus Albanensis reveal that the clan refused to recognize the authority of a young girl who would eventually marry an outsider and transfer the ancestral lands to a rival clan name. Instead, Mary's uncle, Donald D.B.H. MacLeod, stepped forward, claimed the chiefship by right of custom and sword, and seized Dunvegan Castle by force. The MacLeod clansmen supported a violent usurper over a legally legitimate female heir because Donald could defend their borders against Clan Donald. Mary MacLeod was kept in exile in the Lowlands, reduced to a political pawn in Edinburgh, while the clan structure on Skye remained aggressively male. If female political succession was blocked by custom, what of the famous women who supposedly commanded troops during times of national crisis? No figure is cited more frequently by modern revisionist texts than Lady and Farquharson Mackintosh, known popularly to Romantic myth as Colonel Anne. During the Jacobite Rising of 1745, Anne's husband, Angus Mackintosh, chose to support the Hanoverian government, accepting a commission in the Black Watch. Anne, aged just over 20, was a passionate Jacobite. Recognizing that her husband's political alignment threatened to dishonor the clan's traditional loyalties, she took direct action. She successfully raised 350 men from Clan Mackintosh and the wider Chattan Confederation to fight for Prince Charles Edward Stuart. To the modern writer, this is proof of a female clan chief commanding an army. But primary documents reveal a different, non-combatant reality. The journals, letters, and eyewitness accounts gathered in the Lyon in Mourning demonstrate that Anne's leadership was strictly socio-political and logistical, not military. She used her aristocratic position and maternal prestige to convince tenant farmers to join the prince's army. Once the men were assembled, she did not lead them on the march, nor did she ever command them in the field, and knew that the clansmen would not follow a woman into tactical combat. She explicitly appointed Alexander MacLivray of Dunmaglas to hold the actual military command of the regiment. It was MacLivray who drilled the men, MacLivray who planned the maneuvers, and MacLivray who led the fateful, bloody charge of the Chattan regiment at the Battle of Culloden, where he was cut down by government grape shot, and herself remained miles away from the front line at Moy Hall, managing intelligence and hospitality. Her moniker colonel, and was not an official military rank. It was a colorful nickname given by Prince Charles's officers. To transform her into a frontline warrior is an insult to her genuine skill as an aristocratic political organizer, substituting real historical agency for a cartoonish combat caricature. Another figure frequently historicalized by modern commentary is Helen MacGregor, the wife of the legendary outlaw Rob Roy MacGregor. In late 20th century film and fiction, she is depicted as an uncompromising warrior woman, bloodthirsty and eager to wield a sword against English redcoats. Where does this depiction come from? It does not come from any contemporary 18th century record of the MacGregor clan. The historical Helen Mary MacGregor was an unfortunate victim of the brutal, state-sponsored suppression of her family name. She suffered eviction and trauma, but there is no archival evidence to suggest she ever took part in guerrilla warfare. Sir Walter Scott Wisner invented the character of the fierce, masculine Highland matriarch. He wrote her as a theatrical Amazon because it sold books to an urban audience wanting to view the Highlands as an exotic, primal world. By stripping away these romantic layers, we find a history that was far more complex and restrictive for the women of the clans. To claim that women took part in Highland warfare requires a complete ignorance of how clan battles were actually fought. The mechanics of this tactic were brutal and swift. Clansmen advanced at a run, fired a single musket volley at close range, dropped their firearms, and then engaged in a dead sprint directly into the gunsmoke. The goal was to smash enemy formations through sheer physical impact and shock, followed immediately by hand-to-hand combat using basket-hilted broadswords, dirks, and heavy targe shields. This style of combat demanded explosive physical strength and a lifetime of martial training. The targe was a solid oak and leather shield. The broadsword required immense forearm strength. The Lacoba axe was a massive polem used to hack down cavalry. The descriptions of battles found in primary sources like the Memoirs of Lahil emphasize the raw physical shock of the collision between opposing lines. The records explicitly detail the severing of limbs, the splitting of skulls, and the intense physical exhaustion of hand-to-hand melee. Throughout these detailed tactical records, muster lists, and casualty tallies, there is not a single mention of a female combatant. High-born women were safely ensconced in fortified keeps. Low-born women were tasked with securing cattle and children away from the path of the armies. The battlefield was a strictly male space. The total absence of women from the battlefield does not mean they were unimportant to the wartime survival of the clan. Their actual contributions were immense, but they were strictly civilian, logistical, and cultural. When the clan mobilized for a campaign, the entire domestic economy fell onto the shoulders of the women. They managed the planting and harvesting of crops, ensuring that if the men returned, they would not find their families starved. They salted beef, baked oatcakes for rations, and drove livestock into hidden glens to prevent capture by enemy raiders. Women held a sacred place through the bard and the keening. They composed the Gaelic poetry that recorded the deeds of the fallen. It was the women who gathered over the corpses to perform the rhythmic, haunting laments that ushered the dead into memory. To substitute this vital, foundational cultural labor for the ahistorical claim that they were simply poor imitations of male foot. Soldiers is to completely misunderstand the integrated mechanics of Gaelic society. If the historical and archival evidence against female clan leadership and combat participation is so overwhelming, why does the myth persist? Why does it continue to be taught in modern cultural workshops, written into academic essays, and celebrated in heritage festivals? The answer lies in a contemporary academic environment that often values political utility over empirical truth. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, historical analysis underwent a permanent shift. A school of thought emerged that viewed historical narratives primarily through the lens of power, dynamics, and identity politics. Within this framework, a historical society that excluded women from military and political power was seen as inherently defective, an uncomfortable truth that needed correcting. Rather than accepting that the pre-modern Highlands were a deeply patriarchal, warlord-dominated culture, some writers sought to actively project modern, egalitarian aspirations backward onto the past. They took exceptional, isolated events of political necessity and inflated them into mainstream cultural practices. This process relies on an intentional blurring of historical definitions. If a woman defended her home from an unexpected raid while her husband was away, revisionist histories record it as proof of a female warrior tradition. If a woman managed an estate while her husband was imprisoned, she is rebranded as a clan leader. This semantic sleight of hand strips these historic women of their actual context, forcing them into a modern ideological mold. To honor these women, we must recognize their actual, vital labor rather than inventing a role they would likely have rejected. The root fallacy of the revisionist argument is the flawed premise that for a woman to have historical value, she must have acted like a man. By claiming Scottish women were chiefs and soldiers, revisionists devalue the profound authority women held within their actual, designated spheres. Early, modern Scottish women possessed an immense amount of social capital and agency. They were the anchors of the kinship networks that prevented the clans from fracturing into total chaos. They negotiated marriages, which were the primary treaties of the Highland world, cementing peace or declaring war between rival dynasties. They held court within the domestic sphere, managed vast household economies, and were the sole custodians of oral culture, language, and lineage. To suggest their lives only mattered if they were swinging a sword is a deeply flawed view of history that judges female historical importance solely by their participation in masculine violence. Today, anyone looking at the official roster of the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs will find several prominent women holding the title of chief. Madam Margaret Elliot of Elliot, Pauline Hunter of Hunterston, and Madam Eleanor Kincaid of Kincaid all stand as legally recognized leaders of their respective clans. To the casual observer, the modern presence of these female chiefs seems to validate the idea that women always had a path to leadership. But this contemporary reality is actually the ultimate proof of the traditional system's complete extinction. The only reason women are accepted as clan chiefs today is because the definition of a clan chief changed fundamentally after 1746, following the Jacobite defeat. The Heritable Jurisdictions Act stripped chiefs of their private armies and legal power over life and death. The chief was transformed overnight from a military commander into a civilian landlord and a cultural figurehead. Once the requirement to lead men into combat was removed, inheritance became a purely genealogical matter regulated by the court of the Lord Lyon. The modern female chief is a product of Victorian peace, not Highland tradition. To move the argument to empirical proof, historians look to macro-level historical records. When the Scottish Crown levied troops, meticulous lists were drawn up detailing exactly who owed military service. If a parallel tradition of female militancy existed, it would show up in these operational ledger entries. However, across thousands of pages of early modern records, the gender asymmetry is absolute. In the register of the Privy Council, women appear frequently as property owners, complainants, or victims of cattle raiding. They are completely absent from judicial commissions ordered to suppress with fire and sword. Lawless elements of the Highlands. The state recognized that the execution of violence was carried out entirely by the male population, targeting male networks of power. The expansion of Clan Campbell across the Southwest Highlands throughout the 15th and 16th centuries offers an instructive study. It shows how legal paperwork from the South was systematically used to dispossess female heirs general in favor of male military containment. The Earls of Argyll were masters of using feudal law to secure legal titles to lands where direct male lines had collapsed. When a neighboring clan chief died without a son, the Campbells would frequently buy up the wardship and marriage rights of the surviving daughters. Armed with these feudal charters, they would march an army into the territory. If these clans possessed an internal tradition of female leadership, the clansmen would have rallied behind the inheriting daughter to preserve their autonomy. Instead, the primary records show that the clansmen invariably rebelled against the female heir, viewing her legal title as a fundamental threat to their security. They preferred to support a male cadet cousin who could fight the Campbells, even if that cousin was technically an outlaw. The legal existence of female heirs was a useful legal fiction for Southern politicians, but a functional impossibility for the clans on the ground. The insistence on inserting a combat-ready matriarchy into early modern Scotland is more than just bad history. It is a symptom of a larger cultural phenomenon. When ideological movements look backward, they do not see a foreign country with different values, desperate material scarcities, and unforgiving environmental realities. Instead, they look for a mirror to validate their own contemporary concerns. This creates a serious problem. By treating isolated incidents of defensive desperation as systemic evidence of an unrecognized warrior lineage, writers build a flawed alternate timeline. This makes it easy to claim that anyone who points out the rigid, patriarchal nature of Gaelic warfare is simply engaging in erasure. In Lyon Sud-Ouest, the actual historical method built upon empirical analysis of primary documents is replaced by narrative construction driven by wishful thinking. There is a profound irony in how modern revisionist history treats the real women of the Highlands. By insisting that these women are only historical or worthy of respect if they acted like men if they picked up weapons, engaged in violent conflict, or held political positions dependent on military power revisionism unintentionally embraces the very patriarchal values it claims to fight. It suggests that domestic, agricultural, linguistic, and cultural preservation is a lesser, secondary history that needs to be spiced up with fictional combat credentials to be interesting to a modern audience. The true history of Highland women is built on endurance, not combat. They survived in a highly volatile landscape, kept families intact while the male population was decimated by endemic blood feuds and ill-fated political alliances, and passed down the complex oral history, poetry, and genealogies that allowed Gaelic culture to survive the brutal clearances of the late 18th and 19th centuries. To take these women out of their actual context and draft them into fictional frontline combat units is to erase their real lives. It silences their authentic voices and replaces them with an artificial, modern caricature designed to satisfy contemporary political agendas. History demands that we face the past as it actually was, not as we wish it had been. The warrior queen of the glens, the female chief leading the clan into battle, and the sword-wielding Highlander grandmother are figures of historical fiction and romantic myth. They belong to the same imaginative world as the tragic poetry of Macpherson's Ossian or the costumed pageantry of Victorian. Gatherings creations built after the fact to satisfy a longing for an exotic, dramatic past. The archives, the physical ruins, and the harsh realities of early modern warfare leave no room for doubt. The traditional Scottish clan system was built by men, for men, organized specifically around the management of physical violence. Women were intentionally, systematically excluded from military command and political chiefships because the survival of the community relied on a strict division of labor dictated by immediate material survival. By taking this myth out of our historical analysis and placing it firmly in the category of modern folklore, we do not diminish the legacy of Scotland's women. Instead, we give them back their real history. We protect their memory from modern ideological biases and allow them to stand, as they truly were, the strong, vital anchors of a hard and vanished world. To understand how an absolute historical falsehood becomes an accepted alternative narrative in modern popular culture, we must dissect the specific academic and literary mechanisms used to construct it. The lifeblood of the Highland Amazon myth is a process known to historians as semantic slippage. This occurs when contemporary analysts take a word or phrase from an ancient text and intentionally stretch its definition to match modern concepts. For instance, in 16th century Gaelic poetry, a noblewoman who managed her family's castle during her husband's absence might be praised as a bangachta, which translates literally to a female guardian or protector. In the context of early modern Europe, this was a domestic and managerial compliment. It praised her ability to keep the servants working, secure the food supplies, and maintain order within the castle walls until her husband returned. Modern revisionists, however, take the term bangachta and translate it as warrior queen or female military commander. Through this deliberate mistranslation, a dedicated household manager is transformed into a frontline combatant. The historical context where she was actually carrying out administrative and domestic duties is completely ignored to manufacture a fictional tradition of armed female militancy. A second method used by revisionist writers is the inflation of anomalies. In any highly militarized society, unusual crises will happen. If a castle is suddenly attacked while the men are away fighting elsewhere, the women, children, and elderly left behind will naturally throw stones. They might pour hot oil or drop debris from the walls to defend their lives. This is not a planned military strategy. It is a basic human survival instinct. Revisionist history takes these desperate, isolated moments of self-defense and presents them as proof of an organized system. If a historic document notes that a blacksmith's wife struck an invading soldier with a poker, revisionist essays catalogue it as evidence of a tradition. This approach completely ignores basic logic. By turning rare, desperate moments of survival into everyday social customs, it completely distorts the real history. It creates an impression of an egalitarian warrior culture that would have shocked and confused the actual people of the 16th century Highlands. The deeply patriarchal nature of the Scottish clan system was built upon a harsh, unforgiving pastoral economic system. Unlike the rich agricultural regions of lowland Scotland or England, the mountainous terrain of the Highlands made large-scale crop farming impossible. The primary source of wealth, status, and survival was livestock, specifically hardy black cattle. In a cattle-based economy, wealth is highly mobile and easily stolen. A rival clan could ride into a glen overnight and drive them away. Because of this constant vulnerability, the entire social structure had to be organized around the immediate, violent defense and recovery of livestock. This structural reality made male physical force absolutely essential for everyday survival. A family without adult men faced immediate poverty. In this high-stakes environment, social status was tied entirely to a person's ability to participate in the dangerous raids known as the Creech. Because women were physically disadvantaged in these long, exhausting cattle raids, they were systematically excluded from ownership and political decision-making. The pastoral economy naturally reinforced a rigid patriarchal system where those who held the weapons controlled the wealth. To fully dismantle the myth, we must look at the harsh realities of daily survival. Life was a relentless struggle against malnutrition and disease. The caloric intake of the average Highlander was remarkably low, consisting primarily of oats, barley, and occasional dairy products. In this environment of scarcity, human bodies were pushed to their absolute limits. The physical demands of daily life were severe. For women, these challenges were compounded by the physical toll of frequent pregnancies and child-rearing in damp, unheated stone longhouses. The physical demands of early modern Highland weapons made frontline combat impossible for individuals already strained by hard labor. Wielding a 5-pound broadsword or a heavy polem over an extended melee required immense upper body strength and intensive martial training. To suggest that Highland women regularly joined these charges while managing intensive domestic labor and constant childcare is an absurd fantasy. As we reach the final analysis, the evidence points to an inescapable conclusion. Every single line of archival data reaffirms this patriarchal society. The romantic image of the sword-wielding Highland warrior queen is a modern invention that collapses under genuine historical scrutiny. This myth persists because it satisfies a modern cultural desire for romantic escapism. It reduces real women to a cartoonish warrior caricature. By dismantling this myth, we do not erase these women. We rescue them. We strip away the fictional Victorian romance to reveal the true story. They were the enduring, resilient pillars of a harsh and vanished world, anchoring an entire culture through an age of blood and iron. The myth of the Highland Amazon must be permanently laid to rest, allowing the authentic, far more interesting truth of history to finally be told.